I never thought I'd see the day when my own family would try to humiliate me in public. There I was, standing in the middle of the Westfield Community Center, my arthritic hands trembling, clutching that small piece of paper while my daughter-in-law Diane screamed at me, "She's not sitting here. This section is for immediate family only." Her voice echoed across the auditorium as dozens of people turned to stare. My grandson's graduation ceremony, the event I'd been looking forward to for months, and there I was, being treated like some unwanted stranger. I felt my chest tighten as tears threatened to spill. Then I unfolded the paper in my hands, the one with the reserved seating confirmation that my grandson had arranged specially for me. "Actually," I said, my voice surprisingly steady as I held it up, "Jake made sure I would be here in the front row." The look on Diane's face when she saw his handwriting, I'll never forget it as long as I live. In that moment, as she backed away, her face flushing with embarrassment, I realized something had fundamentally broken between us. This wasn't just about a seat at a graduation. This was about 3 decades of tension finally erupting in public. This was about a woman who had been trying to erase me from my son and grandchildren's lives for years. And looking at her face, that mixture of shock, anger, and defeat, I knew we had reached a point of no return. What would happen next would change our family forever. Would you believe that 28 years ago, I was helping that same woman pick out her wedding dress? I remember the day clearly, April 17, 1997. My son Michael had been dating Diane for just over a year, and they'd announced their engagement at Christmas. I was thrilled. Michael was my only child, and after losing his father to cancer when he was just 16, we'd formed an unbreakable bond. At least, that's what I thought back then. Diane seemed lovely at first, ambitious, smart, from a good family in Connecticut. When she asked if I'd help her shop for a wedding dress, I was touched. "I don't have a mom to do this with," she told me, her eyes getting misty. "Mine passed when I was in college. It would mean so much if you could help me, Martha." How could I say no? I closed my small alterations shop for the day, losing about $300 in appointments, and drove 2 hours to meet her at an exclusive bridal boutique in Boston. I remember the smell of that place, perfumed fabric, champagne, and that distinct scent of new satin. We spent 5 hours going through dresses. I held pins, suggested alterations, and offered honest opinions while the attendants brought flute after flute of champagne. When she finally found the one, an elegant Align with delicate beading that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, she hugged me tight. "Thank you for being here," she whispered. "It's like having Mom back for a day." I felt special needed, like I was gaining a daughter. Not just a daughter-in-law. I'll tell you exactly when things began to change, though I didn't recognize it at the time. It was during the wedding planning, about 2 months after our shopping trip. I'd been saving for years to help with Michael's wedding, $15,000, to be exact. Not a fortune, but a significant amount for a widow running a small business. When I told them about the money, Michael seemed genuinely moved. Diane, however, had an odd reaction. "That's thoughtful," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "But we've already got most things covered. Maybe you could just handle the rehearsal dinner." The rehearsal dinner ended up costing me $4,200, and I never heard what happened to the rest of my offered contribution. Looking back, that was the first red flag the moment she began positioning me as unnecessary, peripheral. After the wedding, they moved to Portsmouth, about an hour away from my home in Portland, Maine, close enough to visit, but far enough that it required planning. I tried to be respectful of their space as newlyweds, limiting my calls to once a week and visits to once a month. Still, each time I suggested coming down, there seemed to be a reason it wasn't convenient. Michael's swamped with work, or we're redecorating that weekend, or we might be going to visit my dad. The excuses piled up like autumn leaves. When I did visit, I'd bring homemade meals, Michael's favorites like my special chicken pot pie, or the Swedish meatballs his father had loved, only to find them politely accepted and then, I suspected, discarded after I left. Diane always had a comment. "We're trying to cut down on carbs," or "Michael's cholesterol has been a little high." Little by little, even my role as the nurturing mother was being stripped away. Then came the news I'd been waiting for. They were expecting their first child. I can't describe the joy I felt when Michael called to tell me, "Mom, you're going to be a grandmother." Those words were like music. I immediately started planning, looking up knitting patterns for baby blankets, researching the safest cribs and car seats, even taking a refresher course on infant CPR. I wanted to be the kind of grandmother who was present, helpful, but not intrusive. I carefully noted the due date, November 12th, and arranged to take 3 weeks off from my shop to help after the baby arrived. I hired a temporary replacement, rescheduled dozens of regular customers, and prepared to be there for my family during this precious time. I'd wait for their call once the baby arrived. The call never came. I found out through a mutual friend that my grandson Jake had been born on November 10th, 2 days early. He was already 3 days old when I heard the news. When I called, nearly in tears, Michael sounded exhausted and apologetic. Things were crazy, Mom. The labor was complicated, and Diane's dad is already here helping out. Maybe give us a couple weeks to get settled. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. Diane's father, who lived in Connecticut, twice as far away as me, had been called immediately, while I sat at home, unaware that my grandchild had even entered the world. Were they ever planning to call me? I'll never forget sitting alone that night in my living room, surrounded by baby gifts and that hand-knitted blanket I'd spent months making, sobbing until my throat was raw. What had I done to deserve this exclusion from one of life's most precious moments? When I finally did meet Jake, 2 weeks after his birth, the visit was strained. Diane barely let me hold him, always finding a reason to take him back after just a few minutes. He needs to nurse, or I think he needs changing, or he's overtired from meeting too many people. Her father, Gregory, was there, comfortably moving around their kitchen, preparing meals as if he lived there. He'd been staying with them since the birth. In the guest room, I hadn't even been offered for a single night. I watched him confidently warming bottles and doing laundry while I sat stiffly on the edge of their sofa, feeling like an unwelcome visitor. That night at my hotel, yes, I had to stay at a hotel 5 miles away. I cried myself to sleep again. What was happening to my family? And more importantly, why was it happening? Over the next few years, a pattern emerged. I was included in Jake's life, but always at arm's length. Birthday parties where I was seated at the friends' table rather than with family. Christmas gatherings where my gifts were opened last and somewhat dismissively. Phone calls with Michael that seemed to grow shorter and less frequent. Then came their daughter, Emma, born 3 years after Jake. This time, at least, I was informed of the birth via text message the day after it happened. Emma Louise, 7 pounds, 2 ounces, everyone doing well. That was it. No pictures, no invitation to visit, just a clinical announcement. When I called, Diane answered and told me they were limiting visitors for the first month to avoid germs. Somehow, I knew her family wasn't included in that limitation. Do you know what it's like to feel yourself being slowly erased from your own family? It's like watching a photograph fade in the sun, the image of yourself growing fainter and fainter until you're barely visible. Each holiday brought less communication. Each milestone in my grandchildren's lives included me as more of an afterthought. Tried everything I could think of to strengthen our bond. I offered to babysit regularly. We have a nanny. I suggested family dinners at my house once a month. Our schedules are just too unpredictable. I proposed taking Jake and Emma for weekend stays during summer breaks. They have so many activities planned. Every offer met with a polite but firm rejection. Meanwhile, I watched from the sidelines, primarily through social media. As my grandchildren grew, I saw photos of family, vacations I hadn't been told about, school events I hadn't been invited to, and countless gatherings at Diane's father's lake house where the whole family, minus me, smiled for the camera. Each image was like a knife to my heart. I'd comment with loving messages, only to receive perfunctory thanks responses, or sometimes no acknowledgement at all. I kept a journal of all the missed moments. Jake's first soccer trophy on May 15, 2011. Emma's dance recital on June 8, 2014. The family trip to Disney World in April 2016 that I learned about only when Michael changed his Facebook profile picture to one of them all wearing Mickey ears. The documentation of my exclusion filled 3 notebooks over the years. The worst part, Michael seemed oblivious to how much this hurt me. When I finally broke down during one of his rare visits alone, sobbing as I asked why I was being kept at such a distance, he seemed genuinely confused. "What are you talking about, Mom? We're just busy." "Diane, works 60 hours a week at the hospital. The kids have activities every day, and I'm up for partner at the firm. It's not personal, but it was personal. Every time Diane forgot to tell me about a school play or accidentally scheduled a family gathering when she knew I had a prior commitment. Every time she subtly undermined my relationship with the children by saying things like, "Grandma doesn't really understand kids your age," or "Grandma's too old-fashioned for that." I heard about these comments from the children themselves, innocently repeated during our rare moments alone together. I remember one particular visit when Jake was about 8 years old. He was showing me his collection of science books, excited about a volcano project he was doing for school. "Dad helped me build it," he said proudly. Then, in a quieter voice, "I wanted to ask you to help too, but Mom said you probably wouldn't be interested in science stuff because old people don't really get it." Out of the mouths of babes, as they say. I was a chemistry teacher before I opened my alterations business, with a degree from Boston University. But in the narrative Diane had created, I was just a doddering old woman, incapable of understanding the modern world. That night, after returning home, I pulled out my teaching credentials and old photos from my laboratory days and sobbed over them. How had I been so thoroughly misrepresented to my own grandchildren? You might be wondering why I didn't confront Diane directly. The truth is, I tried. 3 times, to be exact. The first attempt was 7 years into their marriage, after the birth of Emma. I invited her for lunch, just the 2 of us, at a nice restaurant halfway between our homes. I had rehearsed what I would say, practicing a non-confrontational approach focused on I statements. "I feel disconnected from the children," I planned to say. "I would love to be more involved in their lives. How can we make that work?" But lunch never happened. She canceled 30 minutes before we were supposed to meet, citing an emergency at work. We never rescheduled. The second attempt was during a rare moment alone at their house, while Michael took the children for ice cream. "Diane," I said carefully, "I feel like there's some tension between us that's affecting my relationship with Michael and the kids. Could we talk about it?" Her response was chilling in its dismissiveness. "Martha," she said, not looking up from her phone, "I think you're creating problems that don't exist. Michael has his own life now, and it's natural for adult children to distance themselves from their parents. If you're feeling left out, maybe that's something you should discuss with your therapist." I didn't have a therapist, but her message was clear. Any issues were in my imagination, my problem to solve alone. The third attempt was the most direct. After I'd been excluded from Jake's 10th birthday party entirely. They'd had it at an amusement park on a weekend when Diane knew I was available. I only found out about it through Facebook photos posted by another parent. That time, I called and asked to speak to both of them on speakerphone. "I am Jake's grandmother," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "How could you have his birthday celebration and not even tell me about it?" Michael sounded genuinely remorseful, but Diane jumped in before he could really respond. "It was a last-minute thing with just a few of his closest friends," she lied. I had seen the photos. There were at least 20 people there, including Gregory and Diane's stepmother. "Besides," she continued, "those roller coasters wouldn't have been safe for someone your age." I was 60 at the time, in perfect health, and had taken Jake on roller coasters myself the previous summer. The gaslighting was so blatant I was left speechless. After that call, things actually got worse. My weekly phone conversations with Michael dwindled to monthly, then bi-monthly. Visits became even more rare. I sent birthday and Christmas gifts that were acknowledged with brief, formal thank you notes that I suspected Diane forced the children to write. I continued to follow their lives through social media, becoming increasingly aware of all I was missing. Jake's first band concert, Emma's soccer championship, family camping trips, and holiday gatherings. I was being systematically erased. And the most painful part was that Michael, my son, my only child, the boy I had raised alone after his father died, seemed to be allowing it to happen. I won't lie to you. There were dark times when I considered giving up, nights when I sat alone in my house, looking at old photos of Michael as a child, wondering if I should just accept that I had lost him. Days when the pain was so intense I couldn't get out of bed. I even consulted a family therapist, Dr. Larson, who confirmed what I had begun to suspect. I was experiencing a form of family estrangement, orchestrated primarily by my daughter. "It's actually not uncommon," she told me during our third session. Some people see their spouse's parent as competition rather than family, especially mothers-in-law. It's about control and insecurity, usually. Knowing it wasn't uncommon didn't make it hurt any less. But something changed on February 23, 2020. I remember the date precisely because it was my 65th birthday. No call from Michael or the kids. Not even a text. Nothing. I spent the day alone, trying to pretend it was just another Sunday. Then, around dinner time, my doorbell rang. It was Emma, my granddaughter, then just 13 years old, standing on my porch with a small, messily wrapped package in her hands. "Happy birthday, Grandma," she said, slightly out of breath. "I rode my bike here. It's only 5 miles, and I mapped it out on Google." Before I could recover from my shock, she continued, "Mom and Dad think I'm at a study group. I have to be back by 8, but I couldn't let your birthday go by without seeing you." That moment, the sight of her determined little face, the realization that she had planned and executed this secret mission to see me, broke something open in my heart. I ushered her inside, fighting back tears as she proudly presented me with her gift, a handmade bracelet of beads and charms. "I made it in art class," she explained. "See, it has your birthstone, and mine, and Jake's too, so you can have all of us with you." We had less than an hour together before she had to leave to make it home on time, but in that hour, everything changed for me. My granddaughter had risked getting in trouble to see me. She remembered my birthday when her parents didn't. She cared. As I watched her pedal away after making her promise to text me when she got home safely, I made a decision. I would no longer be a passive victim in this situation. I would no longer accept being erased. If my grandchildren were willing to fight to maintain a relationship with me, I owed it to them, and to myself, to do the same. But I needed to be smart about it. Strategic. This wasn't about confronting Diane with accusations or forcing Michael to choose between his wife and his mother. This was about finding a way back into my family's life that couldn't be easily dismissed or denied. That night, I called my oldest friend, Patricia. We'd been close since college, and she had watched this whole painful saga unfold over the years. "Enough is enough," I told her, after explaining what had happened with Emma. "I need to find a way to be present in my grandchildren's lives that Diane can't control." Patricia was silent for a long moment before responding. "Well," she finally said, "what do the kids do? What are their activities, their interests? Maybe there's a way to be part of those things that doesn't require Diane's permission." It was such a simple suggestion, but it sparked something in me. Where there's a will, there's a way, and I suddenly had a very strong will indeed. The next day, I began my research. Through careful examination of Michael and Diane's social media posts and conversations with mutual friends, I mapped out Jake and Emma's activities. Jake, now 16, was heavily involved in the school band and science club. Emma was on the soccer team and took art classes at the community center. I also discovered something else. Both children attended the Westfield Community Center's summer programs. Jake had been a junior counselor the previous year, and Emma was signed up for their art camp. The community center was open to all residents of the county, which included me. I could become involved there without needing anyone's permission. I won't detail all the steps I took over the next few months, but I'll share the most important ones. First, I joined the Westfield Community Center as a volunteer, specifically requesting to help with their summer programs. At my interview, I mentioned my background in teaching and my sewing skills, which immediately got me assigned to help with costumes for their summer theater production. Second, I joined the Band Parents Association at Jake's high school, offering to help with fundraising for their spring trip to a regional competition. Third, I found out which art studio Emma took classes at and enrolled myself in an adult class on the same day, making it possible for us to accidentally run into each other. None of these moves was direct enough to be interpreted as interference or stalking. I was simply an active community member, a former teacher supporting education, an art enthusiast taking classes. If we happened to cross paths, how could that be my fault? I was careful never to mention these activities to Michael or Diane, and I asked the few mutual friends who knew what I was doing to keep it to themselves. This wasn't about creating conflict, it was about creating opportunity. The first accidental meeting happened in April, at the community center. I was sorting through fabric donations for the costume department when Jake walked in with some other teenage volunteers. He stopped short when he saw me, clearly surprised. "Grandma, what are you doing here?" His voice was loud enough that the other volunteers looked over curiously. Perfect witnesses. "Oh, Jake," I exclaimed with just the right amount of surprised delight. "What a coincidence. I've been volunteering here for a few weeks now. I'm helping with costumes for the summer show." I gestured at the piles of fabric around me. "What about you? Are you volunteering too?" What followed was the longest conversation I'd had with my grandson in years. He told me about his role as a junior counselor, his plans for college the following year, information I should have known already but didn't, and his girlfriend Melissa, who was also volunteering that day. I met her briefly, a lovely, polite girl who seemed genuinely interested when Jake explained I was his grandmother. "Your grandmother volunteers here. That's so cool," she said, giving me a warm smile. "My grandparents just play golf all day." That small interaction, being seen as cool in front of his girlfriend, shifted something in Jake's perception of me. I could see it happening, the realization that I wasn't just old grandma but a person with interests and abilities. By the end of our conversation, we had established that we'd both be at the center every Thursday afternoon. "Maybe we could grab coffee in the cafeteria sometimes," he suggested casually. "If you want." Those 5 words, "if you want," nearly broke me with their tentative hope. "I'd love that," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. Every Thursday, then, as he walked away, I allowed myself a moment of pure joy. First contact had been made, and it had gone better than I could have hoped. Emma was next, though our meeting was less accidental. I had timed my art class to finish just as hers would be starting, ensuring we'd cross paths in the studio. When she saw me washing brushes at the sink as her class filed in, her face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Grandma," she called out, rushing over to hug me regardless of who might be watching. "Are you taking classes here too?" Unlike Jake's surprise, hers held no suspicion, only delight. "I started last week," I told her, hugging her back tightly. "I've always wanted to learn proper painting techniques." That wasn't entirely true. I'd taken art classes in college, but the white lie was worth it for the opportunity it created. Emma immediately introduced me to her friends and teacher as my grandmother, who makes the best cookies ever and can sew anything. The pride in her voice made my heart swell. Her teacher, Ms. Abernathy, seemed pleased. "We could use someone with sewing skills," she mentioned. "We're planning a fashion show of upcycled materials for the end of term, and none of us really knows how to operate a sewing machine properly." Just like that, I was invited to help with their project, giving me a legitimate reason to be present during Emma's class times. Another door had opened, this one leading directly into my granddaughter's world. These new connections brought immediate joy, but I was careful not to overplay my hand. I didn't pepper the children with questions about their parents. I didn't ask why I hadn't been invited to various events. I simply focused on building genuine relationships with them as individuals, separate from the family dynamics that had kept us apart. We talked about their interests, their friends, their hopes and worries. I became a sounding board, a supporter, a safe space without agenda or judgment. And the more I did this, the more they sought me out. By June, both children were regularly texting me something that had never happened before. Jake would send me photos of science projects or links to music he thought I might enjoy. Emma shared her artwork and asked my advice about friendship dramas. We had inside jokes and special emoji combinations that meant thinking of you or having a rough day. These small digital connections were precious threads weaving us back together, one text at a time. Of course, I knew this newfound closeness couldn't remain secret forever. The children were bound to mention our interactions to their parents eventually. I prepared myself for the confrontation I knew was coming, rehearsing calm, reasonable responses to the accusations I anticipated. "I'm a member of the community too," I would say. "I have every right to volunteer and take classes. The fact that we enjoy spending time together shouldn't be threatening to anyone." But the confrontation didn't come, at least, not in the way I expected. Instead, on a warm evening in late June, Michael showed up at my door unannounced. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. For a terrible moment, I thought he was there to accuse me of interfering, to draw more boundaries I wasn't allowed to cross. But then he spoke, his voice heavy with an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. "Mom," he said, "I think we need to talk." He stepped inside, declined my offer of coffee, and sat heavily on the couch where he had played as a child. Then, to my complete shock, he began to cry. Not just a few tears, but deep, racking sobs that shook his entire body. Hadn't seen my son cry like that since his father's funeral 27 years earlier. I sat beside him and did what any mother would do. I put my arms around him and held him while he cried, murmuring reassurances even though I had no idea what was wrong. Finally, when the storm had passed, he pulled away and looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice hoarse. "I've been a terrible son." What came next was a conversation unlike any we'd had in decades. Michael admitted that he had been aware of Diane's efforts to distance me from the family, but had convinced himself it wasn't that bad or that I didn't notice. "I took the path of least resistance," he confessed. "It was easier to go along with Diane than to challenge her. Easier to assume you were okay than to face the fact that I was hurting you." He told me that Emma had confessed to her secret birthday visit months earlier, and had been regularly updating him on our art class meetings. Jake, too, had mentioned our community center encounters, expressing surprise at how actually cool I was. "They've been seeing more of you than I realized," he said, "and the way they talk about you, it made me realize what I've been allowing to happen, what I've been participating in." I listened without interrupting, though my heart was racing with a mixture of hope and trepidation. When he finally fell silent, I asked the question that had been haunting me for years. "Why, Michael? Why has Diane been so determined to keep me at a distance?" He sighed deeply, rubbing his face with his hands. "It's complicated. Part of it is her own family history. Her relationship with her mother was difficult before she died. Part of it is jealousy over how close you and I were after Dad died." He paused, then added something that stunned me. "And part of it, I think, is that she feels threatened by you. By your independence, your relationships with the kids. Like it's some kind of competition she's afraid of losing." "It was never a competition," I said quietly. "I just wanted to be part of the family." Michael nodded, looking ashamed. "I know that now. I think I always knew it. I took the easy way out. And I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." There were more tears then, from both of us, as years of hurt and misunderstanding spilled out between us. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. Too much had happened for that. But it was a beginning. A recognition of the problem, which is always the first step toward solving it. As our conversation wound down, Michael made a promise that both thrilled and terrified me. "Jake's graduation is next month," he said. "He's asked specifically that you be there, in the family section." I've already told him yes. My heart leaped at the invitation, but anxiety quickly followed. "What about Diane?" I asked. "She won't like that." Michael's expression hardened slightly, a determination I hadn't seen in him for years. "I'm working on that," he said. "Things between Diane and me, they're not great right now, for reasons beyond just this. But regardless, Jake wants you there. I want you there. And you'll be there. In the family section. I promise." I didn't fully believe it would happen, to be honest. Despite Michael's apparent change of heart, years of disappointment had taught me to protect myself from hope. I marked the date of the graduation on my calendar, July 15th, but prepared myself for a last-minute text saying the plans had changed, or there had been a misunderstanding about seating, or any of the other excuses I'd become accustomed to over the years. Even when Jake himself texted me to confirm, "Can't wait to see you at graduation, Grandma. I've made sure you have a seat in the front row," I remained cautiously optimistic at best. The week before the ceremony, Michael called again. "I've spoken to Diane," he said, his voice tense. "She knows you'll be sitting with us." It wasn't an easy conversation, but it's settled. "And Mom, Jake has arranged something special. He's been working with the community center on a recognition for outstanding volunteers, and you're receiving an award at the ceremony." This news left me speechless. My grandson had arranged for me to be publicly recognized. It seemed too good to be true, like a dream I might wake from at any moment. I spent the days leading up to graduation in a state of nervous anticipation, alternating between joy at the prospect of finally being included and anxiety about a potential public confrontation with Diane. I chose my outfit carefully, a powder blue dress that Emma had once complimented, comfortable but elegant shoes, a simple pearl necklace that had been a gift from Michael's father. I had my hair done at the salon, splurging on a professional style for the first time in years. If this was to be my re-entry into family events, I wanted to look my best. Not to compete with Diane, never that, but to hold my head high with dignity. The morning of the graduation dawned clear and warm. I arrived at the Westfield Community Center 30 minutes early. My confirmation paper clutched in my purse like a precious talisman. The auditorium was already beginning to fill with proud families, everyone dressed in their best and buzzing with excitement. I hesitated at the entrance, scanning the crowd for familiar faces, my stomach knotting with nerves. Then I saw Emma, her long brown hair decorated with ribbons in the school colors, waving frantically from near the front of the room. "Grandma, over here," she called, loud enough for heads to turn. "We saved you a seat." As I made my way toward her, I saw the rest of the family. Michael, looking handsome, in a dark suit. Jake, glimpsed briefly backstage in his graduation robe, giving me a thumbs up. And Diane, her posture stiff, her smile fixed and unnatural as she watched me approach. The seat they had saved was indeed in the front row, right next to Diane herself, a choice that felt deliberate in its awkwardness. I took a deep breath and walked forward with as much grace as I could muster, determined not to let tension spoil this important day. That's when it happened, the moment that changed everything. As I reached the row, Diane suddenly stood up, her face flushing with anger. "She's not sitting here," she hissed loudly, looking not at me but at Michael. "This section is for immediate family only." The people around us fell silent, all eyes turning to our unfolding drama. Emma looked mortified, shrinking into her seat. Michael started to respond, his expression a mixture of anger and embarrassment. But before he could speak, I found myself calmly opening my purse and withdrawing the paper Jake had sent me. "Actually," I said, unfolding it to reveal not just a seating confirmation but a small note in Jake's handwriting. Jake made sure I would be here in the front row. I held it out where everyone could see his words. "Grandma, you get the best seat because you're my biggest supporter. Love you, Jake." Diane's face underwent a remarkable transformation as she read it. Shock, anger, embarrassment, and finally, defeat. Without another word, she sank back into her seat, leaving the space beside her open for me. As I sat down, my hands still trembling slightly, but my head held high, I felt something shift in the atmosphere around us. The other parents who had witnessed the exchange were giving me small nods of approval. Emma reached across to squeeze my hand, her eyes shining with what looked like pride. Even Michael, though clearly uncomfortable with the public nature of the confrontation, seemed relieved that it had been resolved so quickly and decisively. Only Diane remained rigid beside me, staring straight ahead as if I didn't exist. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Jake gave a speech as class vice president that brought tears to my eyes, especially when he spoke about perseverance and the importance of family support in all its forms. Later, when the Community Service Awards were announced, I was indeed called to the stage. Martha Wilson, the principal, announced, has been selected by our students as the Volunteer of the Year for her exceptional contributions to our theater program, art department, and band fundraising efforts. As I walked to the stage amid applause, I caught sight of Diane's face, a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. But for once, I didn't care what she was thinking. This moment wasn't about her. It was about me, my grandson, and the relationship we had managed to build despite all obstacles. After the ceremony, during the reception, I expected to be subtly excluded as I had been so many times before. Instead, I found myself surrounded by Jake's friends and their parents, many of whom knew me from my volunteer work. "Mrs. Wilson, your costume designs for the spring musical were amazing. Martha, the band fundraiser exceeded its goal. Because of your quilt raffle idea, my daughter loves your art class assistance." With each interaction, I could sense Diane watching from a distance, witnessing a side of me she had never acknowledged, a woman with skills, contributions, and community connections independent of my role as Michael's mother. The most surprising moment came when Jake's girlfriend Melissa's parents approached me. "We've heard so much about you," Melissa's mother said warmly. "Jake tells Melissa you were a chemistry teacher. Our daughter is considering that field for college." Before I knew it, we were deep in conversation about STEM education, my past teaching experiences, and potential college programs for Melissa. It was the kind of conversation I should have been having with other parents for years. Normal. respectful, adult interaction centered around the children we all cared about. The kind of conversation Diane had systematically prevented by casting me as irrelevant or problematic. As the reception was winding down, Jake found me for a proper hug and conversation. "Did you like the surprise, Grandma?" he asked, referring to the award. "Jake, I was so touched," I told him honestly. "But you didn't have to do that." He shook his head firmly. "Yes, I did. Everyone needs to know how amazing you are. And I needed Mom to see it too." There was something in his tone, a hint of the tension he was obviously aware of, that made my heart ache. Children should never have to navigate their parents' interpersonal conflicts. "I'm just happy to be here with you today," I said, changing the subject. "I'm so proud of you, Jake." His smile, then open, genuine, loving, was worth every painful year of estrangement. What happened next was something I never could have predicted. As Jake was called away by friends and I prepared to leave, Diane approached me directly. She looked different somehow, smaller, less certain of herself. "Martha," she said, her voice oddly formal, "would you like to join us for dinner? We're celebrating at Riverside Grill." The invitation was so unexpected I actually looked behind me to see if she was speaking to someone else. But no, she was looking directly at me, waiting for my response. Was this a peace offering, a public performance to save face? I couldn't tell, but I knew my answer would set the tone for whatever came next. "Thank you, Diane," I said carefully. "I'd like that very much." She nodded once, briskly, then turned and walked away without another word. Not exactly warm, but a start. As I gathered my things to follow the family to the restaurant, Emma appeared at my side, linking her arm through mine. "This is good, right?" she whispered. "Mom never invites anyone." The hope in her voice made my decision to accept the right one, regardless of how uncomfortable the dinner might be. "Yes, sweetheart," I replied. "It's a very good start." The dinner was stilted at first, with conversation happening around Diane and me, rather than between us. But as the evening progressed and the children shared stories about their experiences with me at the community center, stories Diane had never heard before, I saw her watching me with new eyes. Not friendly, exactly, but evaluating, reassessing. When Jake mentioned my help with his science project display, her eyebrows rose slightly. "You helped with the molecular model?" she asked, the first direct question she'd addressed to me all evening. "Yes," I answered simply. Chemistry was my field, after all. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps, or the realization that she had misjudged me in at least this one area. By the end of the meal, we weren't friends, far from it, but something had changed. The wall between us had developed a small crack, a fissure through which understanding might eventually flow. As we prepared to leave, Diane said something that gave me pause. "The kids have been happier these last few months," she admitted. Reluctantly, more settled. "I didn't realize," she trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished, but I understood what she wasn't saying. She hadn't realized that my presence in their lives could be positive, not threatening, that loving the same people didn't have to be a zero-sum game. In the weeks that followed graduation, the transformation in my family relationships continued. Michael began calling regularly again once a week, just as we used to do. Jake invited me to his college orientation, an event I would have been excluded from in the past. Emma asked if we could expand our art class time to include lunch beforehand. Small changes, but significant ones. The most substantial change, however, came from an unexpected quarter. Diane herself. It happened during Jake's going-away party in August, before he left for college. I had been invited formally, with an actual paper invitation, and was helping set up the backyard for guests when Diane approached me with 2 glasses of lemonade, offering one to me. "Can we talk?" she asked, gesturing toward the garden bench away from the busy preparations. My stomach clenched with anxiety, but I nodded and followed her. We sat in awkward silence for a moment before she spoke again. "I need to say something to you, Martha. Something long overdue." She took a deep breath, visibly struggling with whatever was coming next. "I've been unfair to you. For years. And I'm sorry. Of all the things I had imagined Diane might say to me over the years, accusations, justifications, cold dismissals, an apology had never been among them. I was so stunned I couldn't immediately respond, which prompted her to continue. "When I married Michael, I was still grieving my mother. Did you know that? She died just 14 months before our wedding. Cancer. like Michael's dad. But unlike you and Michael, my mother and I, we had unfinished business. Arguments never resolved, words never taken back. Her voice caught slightly, and I realized this might be the most personal thing she had ever shared with me. Every time I saw you with Michael, with the kids, being the perfect mother and grandmother I thought my mother would have been if she'd lived. It hurt. It made me feel like I'd been cheated, like my children were getting the grandmother I never had as an adult. She paused, wiping quickly at her eyes. It wasn't rational. It wasn't fair. But that's where it started. And then it just snowballed. The more I pushed you away, the easier it was to keep doing it. To justify it to myself. Another pause. Michael tried to talk to me about it sometimes, but I shut him down. Told him he had to choose peace at home or catering to his mother. It was manipulative and wrong. I found my voice at last, though it emerged as little more than a whisper. Why are you telling me this now, Diane? What's changed? She looked away, toward the house where the party preparations continued without us. The kids, for one thing, they've been so happy since you've been back in their lives, and they've been angry with me, especially Jake. He figured out what I'd been doing years ago but didn't know how to challenge it until recently. She smiled sadly. He's got his father's heart but my backbone. That boy. Once he decided to fix things, there was no stopping him. And Michael, I asked quietly, wondering how much of this reconciliation attempt was coming from him. Diane's expression tightened. Momentarily, Michael and I are working through some things. We've started marriage counseling. It's not just about you. There are other issues, but this situation has been a symptom of deeper problems between us. The therapist helped me see that my behavior toward you has been a way of controlling Michael, of keeping him focused on our nuclear family, to the exclusion of all else. That's not healthy for any of us, least of all the children. I wasn't sure what to say. Part of me, a very human, very hurt part, wanted to agree vehemently, to lay out all the pain her actions had caused me over the years. But another part recognized the courage it must have taken for her to approach me like this, to acknowledge her behavior so directly. What happens now? I asked instead, choosing to focus on the future rather than the painful past. Diane seemed relieved by the question, by my restraint in not attacking her when she was vulnerable. I don't know exactly, she admitted. I can't promise we'll suddenly be best friends. There's too much history for that. But I can promise to stop actively preventing you from being part of this family. The kids want you in their lives. Michael wants you in his life. And I'm trying to want that too. She hesitated, then added, maybe we could start with regular Sunday dinners, once a month, see how it goes from there. It was a small offering, but considering where we had been just months earlier, it felt momentous. I'd like that, I said simply. We sat in silence for another moment, not comfortable exactly, but not hostile either. Progress, one small step at a time. That conversation marked the beginning of a new chapter in our family story. The monthly Sunday dinners did happen, gradually increasing to twice monthly as they became less awkward. I was included in Emma's 14th birthday celebration in October, helping to plan the art-themed party she wanted. When Thanksgiving approached, Michael called to formally invite me, adding that his in-laws would be there too. We thought it was time for all the grandparents to be together, he said, a statement that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Diane and I will never have the mother-daughter relationship I once hoped for. There's too much water under that particular bridge. But we have developed a cordial, occasionally even warm interaction based on the people we both love. She still has moments of stiffness, of reverting to old patterns, particularly when she feels stressed or insecure. I've learned to recognize these moments for what they are and give her space rather than pushing for inclusion. It's a dance we're both learning, step by step. The most profound changes have been with my grandchildren. Jake calls me weekly from college, sharing his experiences and asking my advice about classes. Emma and I have our standing art date, now followed by lunch and shopping time, that has become precious to us both. Michael and I have rebuilt much of what was lost. Though there's a carefulness to our relationship now, an awareness of how fragile family bonds can be when not properly tended. We're both more intentional, less willing to take each other for granted. And me, I've reclaimed parts of myself I thought were gone forever. The teacher, the artist, the community volunteer. I've made new friends through my activities at the center, developed a social circle independent of my role as grandmother or mother. In fighting to remain relevant to my family, I discovered how much more there is to me than those family roles, important as they are. It's been a journey of rediscovery as much as reconciliation. If you're listening to this and thinking about your own family tensions, your own experiences of being pushed aside or made to feel unwelcome, I want you to know something important. You matter. Your place in your family matters. And while you can't control how others behave, you can choose how you respond. Sometimes the path back to connection is direct confrontation. Sometimes it's patient persistence. For me, it was finding ways to be present that couldn't be easily dismissed, creating opportunities for relationship that bypassed the gatekeepers. Whatever your situation, remember this. Families are complicated, messy things. People carry wounds and insecurities that have nothing to do with you but affect you nonetheless. Diane's behavior wasn't really about me. It was about her own unresolved grief, her insecurities, her need for control. Understanding that didn't excuse what she did, but it helped me approach reconciliation with compassion rather than bitterness. Last month, at Emma's winter choir concert, something happened that symbolized how far we've come. When we arrived at the auditorium, there was a moment of confusion about seating. The front row had been reserved for immediate family, but there weren't enough seats for everyone. I prepared to take a seat further back, assuming the old hierarchy would reassert itself in this moment of stress. But before I could move away, Diane touched my arm lightly. "We saved you a spot here, Martha," she said, indicating the seat beside her. "Emma would want you up front." It was a small gesture, but in the context of our history, it felt monumental. As we sat together, waiting for the concert to begin, I thought about that graduation day last summer. The confrontation, the tension, the public drama, how different things were now, not perfect but immeasurably better. Diane must have been thinking something similar because she leaned toward me slightly and whispered, "We've come a long way since July, haven't we?" There was a hint of humor in her voice, an acknowledgement of the absurdity of our past conflicts. I nodded, allowing myself a small smile in return. "Yes," I agreed quietly, "one reserved seat at a time. If you're dealing with family estrangement or tension right now, please don't give up hope. Things can change. People can change. It takes time, patience, and sometimes a willingness to forge new paths when old ones are blocked. But the love of family, real, complicated, imperfect family love, is worth fighting for. I know because I've lived it. I've lost it and found it again. If my story helps even one person find their way back to connection, then sharing it has been worthwhile. So leave a comment below if you've experienced something similar. Subscribe to hear more stories of family reconciliation and healing. And if you know someone who might be going through this kind of family tension right now, someone who's being pushed aside or made to feel unwelcome, share this with them. Sometimes knowing you're not alone makes all the difference in finding the courage to change your situation. This is Martha from Portland, Maine, signing off with gratitude for your time and attention. Remember, in family matters, persistence and love usually win in the end. Thank you for listening to my story.